As I said, I wanted to take a page out of Jesus' book this morning and do what Jesus did, was ask you to take out a coin. So everybody should have a quarter by now, or one near them. So take out your coin. Let me ask the question that Jesus asked. Whose image is on this? Whose head and whose title? So what image do you see on your coin? George Washington. And George Washington's head has always been on the quarter, right? No. What year was George Washington's head put on the quarter? 1932. There we go, 1932. Way to go. Said he was there. It was for the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. I assume you weren't there for that. that they put his image on the quarter, George Washington. What else do you see on the quarter? Liberty, yep. In God we trust. That's always been the national motto of the United States, isn't it? No. What year was that added? Very close. 1956 is when Congress passed the law to make In God We Trust the official motto of the United States. And in 1957, it began appearing on the money. First on the paper money and then later on coins. Another interesting fact about the quarter is that it didn't always have the notion of that it was a quarter. When it was originally printed, it had no mention of its value. It was just assumed by its weight it had a relative value, so a dollar coin was 4 times as heavy as a quarter coin. It was later that they put on 25 cents in 1804. Then in 1838, quarter dollar was used. And finally in 1892 was what you see now, which is quarter dollar. It was moved to the front. And that's where you see it today. Anybody have other images on this coin? Statue of Liberty is on yours, right. Great. What else? Eagle. Anybody have a state on theirs? Yeah, there's a few states out there. In 1999, they began printing the states, and they've been going through that over the last 20 years, really. For 10 years, it was just the states, and then we're in the midst of a program where one national monument or park from each state is being printed. So the Statue of Liberty, representing New York, is on theirs. So the first state that got printed was the first state of the Union. They did it in order. So the first state printed was Delaware. Way to go. And the last state printed was Hawaii. There we go. That's good. This went along well until 2004 when the state of Wisconsin appeared on the coin. There was a pause there because the coin collectors were taking notice. There was a mint error. Every time the mint produces a new quarter for a new state, it makes about 500 million of them, and sometimes mistakes are made. So the state side of the Wisconsin quarters have the head of a cow, a wheel of cheese, and an ear of corn bursting forth from the husk. On the error coins, however, there's a little mark on one side of the corn ear that appears to be an additional husk leaf half peeled off the corn. Because so few of these errors were made, if you held one of those coins in your hand right now, it might be worth anywhere from $150 to $1,500. So hang on to that if you've got that. But I don't want to talk about mint errors with you. I wanted to tell you why Jesus had people take a good long look at the coin in their hand. A denarius coin, in their case, not a quarter. And the explanation starts with the questions the Pharisees and the Herodians asked him. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not? Jesus immediately spots their hypocrisy, Mark tells us. He knows that they have asked him this question in order to entrap him. It's a clever little verbal trap, kind of along the lines of, when did you stop beating your husband? You see, paying the imperial tax was the hottest of hot-button political issues in Jesus' time. The Pharisees and Herodians' clever idea was that if Jesus argued against paying the tax, they could accuse him to the Roman governor of urging rebellion against Rome. On the other hand, if he endorsed paying the tax, the common folks who hated their Roman overlords would view him as a quisling, as sympathetic to Rome, and they'd turn away from him. So for Jesus, they thought, this was a lose-lose situation that they were putting him in. Collaborator or subversive. Those were the options they were offering him. I suppose those words have lost their sting that they might have had 70 years ago when collaborator meant collaborator with the Nazis. Or even 50 years ago when subversive meant bombing the math building in Madison. But we still live in a highly charged political atmosphere where the pressure is on to choose one side or the other. And we certainly continue to live in the never-ending human condition where people just seem to love choosing sides and just as much seeing which side the other person is on. So it was 5th grade. And one of those playground arguments between friends that gets taken way more seriously than it should have. Here was the issue. Is it possible that somewhere in the universe there would be inhabitants of a planet who call themselves Vulcans? I think you know enough of my nerd tendencies to know which side of the argument I was on back in 5th grade. That coupled with my diehard Trekkie status and a bit of a psychotic streak that has some difficulty always separating fantasy from reality. But here was the real problem. My best friend was on the other side, arguing the impossibility. No way, no Vulcans, no how, according to my best friend. So our 5th grade teacher, who was an excellent teacher, jumped on the chance to introduce his class to the finer points of intellectual debate, 5th grade style at least. So he had me and my best friend form opposing teams to defend our respective positions, and the rest of the class to act as audience and juror in voting which position they agreed with. I remember the way the room was arranged for the debate, and I remember taking the lead role and arguing for Vulcan possibility. My arguments, as I remember them, were subtle, nuanced, and incisive, and sprinkled with 5th grade rhetorical flourishes like, so there, and oh yeah, and so's your old man. Okay, I don't really remember the debate at all, but I do remember the outcome of the debate, and I'm not saying whose side that the class chose with their votes, other than it wasn't led by the guy who would later go to Stanford and get his law degree from Madison in 2 years. Rather, they may have favored the product of a Midwestern Public University's theater department. I remember the outcome, and I've made sure that my friend remembers it too, all these years later. And I remember one other thing, the awkwardness that hung between us, me and my best friend, for several days, even weeks, after the debate was over. We hadn't been on opposite sides like that before, especially in a public way. And it really threw our friendship for a loop. I'm bringing this up because it seems like with all the problems in our Commonwealth right now, our solution seems to be to rush to opposite sides of the room, politically, ideologically speaking, and shout at one another. Yeah, I know it's presidential primary season, and the conservatives always run to the right, and the liberals always run to the left in order to get the support of the party faithful. And I know they will dash back toward the middle during the general election, but it's more than just election rhetoric that concerns me. It's a deep misunderstanding of what truly defines us. That's what I think Jesus was getting at when he showed them the coin and asked them, whose head is this? The Greek word translated as head is icon, from which we get our English word icon. A better translation of Jesus' question would be, whose image is on this coin? Whose image is on this coin? And that word image takes us to a much deeper and more fundamental truth of our faith. If we give to the coin to the emperor because his image is on it, then what is it that we give to God because God's image is on it? Years ago, when Andre Agassi was the long-haired playboy and young pup of men's professional tennis, he did a series of television ads for a camera company in which the tagline was, "Image is everything." Anybody remember that campaign? Yeah. The ads were nearly universally reviled. It's odd reflecting on them now, especially since the image of Andre Agassi has so definitively changed. Now, he's the guy who confesses that he hated tennis as he grew up. His head no longer sprouts luxurious locks, but is shaved completely bald. And he is the very image of the doting husband and father. What happened to Andre Agassi? Why did his image change so dramatically? Here's another one. In the early 80s, Susie Scott was the centerfold girl in Playboy magazine. I know that not because I read it, by the way, not because I remember it. Anyway. Talk about image. How about the image of a centerfold? Susie Scott spent 10 years of her life doing modeling, acting, promotional work for Playboy magazine. She made a good living. She enjoyed the kind of celebrity that often attaches itself to that lifestyle. In 1988, after one failed marriage, she married Aspen, Colorado attorney Joe Krabacher, and she settled down to a life of comfortable wealth. But then, a little over 20 years ago now, Susie happened to see a TV documentary about child poverty in Mongolia. And she felt that she ought to do something to help. That's when a friend of hers said that maybe she should consider Haiti because it was much poorer than Mongolia and it was in the backyard of the United States. So she traveled to Haiti, where she naively asked a taxi driver to take her to where the poor people are. That's not a long trip in Haiti. The cab driver took her to a shantytown in Port-au-Prince, dropped her off, and quickly sped away. She was stranded. Fortunately, a family of 17 took her in for the night. Doesn't quite compute, does it? A Playboy centerfold in the slums of Cité du Soleil in Port-au-Prince, relying on the hospitality of a poor family of 17. But that's when Susie Scott Krabacher's image began to change, or maybe clarify. Of that first visit, Susie later told a reporter, "I knew I had been reborn on that day." She went on to say that she completely committed herself to Christ and Christ's work by serving God in Haiti. Since then, spending her wealth, Susie started the Foundation for Worldwide Mercy and Sharing, an organization dedicated to serving the children of Haiti. The foundation operates 6 schools, 5 orphanages, a hospital ward for abandoned children. Susie's group feeds, clothes, educates, and nurses close to 2,000 children on an ongoing basis. And Susie hasn't merely set all this up with her money. She spends half of each year down there, nursing sick children, helping in every way that she can. Along the way, she has contracted lice, scabies, and mange. She's been treated for encephalitis. So much for airbrushed glamour. Susie has also been threatened by gangs and troubled by bureaucrats, but she's stuck it out. She's won the respect of the local people of Haiti for her work. So, what image do you now have of Susie Scott Krabacher? Airbrushed airhead and centerfold, or servant of Christ and woman to be reckoned with? Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. This is Jesus' snappy answer to the sneaky question being asked of him. For centuries, this saying has fueled a two kingdoms theology, arguing that we owe our temporal loyalty, earthly loyalty, to king and country, while we give our spiritual loyalty to God. Pay your taxes, support your party, choose your side. That's the ethical argument of this tradition. But of course, it completely misses Jesus' point. First, as Ched Myers notes, if Jesus had intended to pay the temple tax, then why didn't he have a denarius on him? Why did he have to ask for it from somebody else? More importantly, it's a question of image. Caesar may stamp his image on a coin and declare himself the august Son of God as the title on a denarius read. Caesar may violate the commandment against graven images, but that doesn't mean we should. For whose image is on us? That's what Jesus is asking. Our faith declares that you and I are created in the image of God, both male and female. Jesus is not only refusing to play the lose-lose games of the Pharisees, but he is backing it up with a more profound truth. We owe the one who made us our very lives, not just money, but everything of who we are. Jesus would agree with Andre Agassi. Image is everything. But don't forget whose image you really are. And don't forget that there is really no such thing as sides. Just us. Just us together, created in God's image. That's a hard truth to remember and to live into in these contentious times. This last week, with many other area religious leaders, I attended a panel discussion on the subject of being black in the Fox cities. The African American folks on the panel were raised in various places around the country, north and south, in big cities and small, but they all had the same experience here. Since coming to this area, they told us, each and every one of them told us, they and their children have been called the N-word more than in any other place. Here. Here. Does that break your heart like it has theirs? Does it shock you to hear that about our community? Does it make you want to rush out of this church and just shake those folks who practice racism and ask them over and over again, whose image is on you? Whose image is on you? Whose image is on us all? It's God's image. All of us. And that's why we believe there are no sides. There is one race, and it's the human race. Or how many of you tried to eat in a restaurant in Madison a little over a week ago? Too bad, most of them were closed. It was a day without Latinos, organized to protest the bills in the State House limiting the political power of immigrants and asking the police to make extra efforts to determine their immigration status. 20,000 people walked off the job to march around the Capitol building. This is what happens when you choose sides, when you seek to define folks by their heritage, by their ethnicity, by their status. It ruptures the community. No restaurants. The schools in Madison were largely closed too. If the protest were a long one, we'd have very little to eat. 40% of the agricultural workers in this state are Hispanic. Doesn't it make you want to ask those legislators, whose image is on you? Whose image is on you? Whose image is on us all? It's God's image. All of us. And that's why with the Apostle Paul we declare that our citizenship is in heaven. And there are no ID cards for that. That's written on our hearts. That's what Andre Agassi and Susie Scott Krabacher discovered. That's what my best friend and I remember. when we left the debate and stopped taking sides. Image is everything, but only when it's God's image. Let me close with this. The hottest of the hot-button debates these days has to do with the composition of our ultimate national debaters, the Supreme Court. In light of Justice Scalia's sudden death, should or should not the president appoint someone to take his place? This would be the trick question asked today, wouldn't it, of Jesus? I'm sure you've got an opinion about it, as do I. It's been instructive to hear our political leaders offer high-minded rhetoric and solid constitutional arguments on either side to present their position on this important question. But then, we see the video clips from 8 years ago under a different president, and some of the very same politicians, including then Senator Obama, offering up high-minded rhetoric and solid constitutional arguments to advocate the exact opposite position that they are arguing today. People like taking sides, don't they? The funeral mass for Justice Scalia was led by his son, Father Paul Scalia. As he began his eulogy for his father, he said this: "We are gathered here because of one man, a man known personally to many of us, known only by reputation even more, a man loved by many, scorned by others, a man known for great controversy and for great compassion. That man, of course, is Jesus of Nazareth." Father Scalia, who bears a remarkable physical resemblance to his father, remembered. He remembered whose image is really stamped on him. God's image. And that image is everything. Amen.